Okay, thank you for that, Claudia. So I'm at Trinity College Dublin as well, so I work very closely with Claudia. So we're almost working like a combination as well. So I'm going to talk about the same topics, which are lifelong learning, specifically mobile lifelong learning and transitions in mobility for lifelong learners. So same topic, but with a slightly different angle, I hope, on it now. So first of all, anyway, the title for my talk is very verbose. It's an analysis of lifelong learning transitions of mobile learners, implications and principles for the design of technologies to support and facilitate lifelong learning transitions. I think the first part of my research is going to be to make that much shorter. It's a bit too long for the time being. So anyway, I've been given that, so I'll work with it for the time being. So lifelong learning, it's not a new concept. It's been around for centuries. But I think perhaps because of the recent socio-economic changes, there's a lot more emphasis on the need to be continually learning, be it for the job, be it for personal reasons or whatever. It's kind of ironic, really, because I think what's happening now, again, because of maybe the economic conditions, the crashes in the economy, particularly public bodies now are cutting back on adult education as such. I don't know about private companies. It'd be interesting to get views on that. So there's less funding now going into maybe traditional adult education, which means that perhaps the individual has to take more control of learning. So the first thing I'd like to move on to talk about are the categories, the different categories for lifelong learning. These categories have been around for quite a long time. Tough in the 70s came up with these basic categories for lifelong learning. The first category is work. So people who may be looking for a new job, trying to keep up to date in their current jobs. Also more ad hoc learning, where you've got a problem at work, you want to find a solution. So these are examples of work lifelong learning. Also, we have a category of home, maybe personal interest, looking after problems that you have at home with family, finances and things like that. Another category would be general competence. So for example, maybe you want to get fitter, or you want to learn how to play football better. These are examples of general competence. The last one, interest and curiosity. So keeping with the football analogy, maybe you have an interest in the German Bundesliga. So you do research, you do learning on that. Curiosity is sort of again, ad hoc, one-off. Who scored the winning goal at the last Germany-Argentina World Cup final in whichever year? Does anybody know? It wasn't good, so that was yesterday, before that. Okay, so these are things, I don't know either, but out of curiosity you might want to know. So these are examples of lifelong learning. They have been around for a while, but I still think they're very applicable for current situations. One other belief now is that perhaps you need to be a self-regulated learner to be an effective lifelong learner. What is a self-regulated lifelong learner? Well, according to Shah et al., 3 things are important. First of all, the learner must be proactive. You must take control of what you learn and how you learn it. You must be self-organizing. So if you want to learn, you have to be able to organize everything as well. And the third sort of element are motivational and metacognitive strategies must be employed to be an effective lifelong learner. I think with mobile technologies now, we have more options to be proactive and self-organizing. There's a lot of information out there on the internet. So we can find information. We can organize that using application services which are out there as well, which are web-based. The downside to that is perhaps there's too much information out there now. So apart from being proactive and self-organizing, I think we also have to be judicious about what type of materials we use and what we learn. And it was interesting that we had the discussion this morning by Alec. You brought up that model, which I never heard of before. Is it the GITP? Model for competency mapping or whatever. So I think the first one was, can somebody remind me of the 4 elements of that?
Phase of the focus.
The 4 phases of that map. Initiating, so maybe proactive would be initiating. And the second one? Organising, but you got self-organising there, the last two.
Realising, evaluating.
Realising, okay, maybe you need motivational strategies for realising. And the last one was? Evaluating. So you use the metacognitive aspects to evaluate. You think about how you've learned, what you should be doing. So I think these are all important as well to be an effective lifelong learner. So let's look at specifically mobile lifelong learning, which is our focus, and in particular the transitions that are taking place with mobility. Traditional transitions at the macro level might be things like you move from primary school to secondary school, you move from university to work to retirement. We're more focusing on what we call maybe the micro level transitions, so moving from work to home. Okay, changing from a laptop to a smartphone. These are the micro transitions that we're looking at. And we're interested in the sort of mobility of learners using certain dimensions as well. And I've got 4 or 5 dimensions down here. These have been defined by people like Mike Sharples back in maybe 5, 6 years ago. And they've come up with these sort of dimensions, which we're sort of sticking to for the time being anyway. The first one is physical space. Okay, so this could be moving from the office to home, to going on the bus, to a restaurant, or whatever. There's also the aspect now of the virtual side of physical space. You might be sitting down at your desktop, but of course you could be interacting with people all around the world via the internet connectivity. The second type of transition would be technology. Again, moving between smartphone, laptop, desktop, television at home. So we've got lots of different technology transitions as well. Social group is another dimension of mobility. You could work alone, you could study alone, you could work with your colleagues. It could be part of a professional network, maybe on LinkedIn or whatever. So these are all examples of social group. Conceptual space, again, this could be linked to Tuff did some work back in the 70s as well. He mentioned that maybe on average, in 1 year, an adult will do about 8 different learning projects. Within those learning projects, we have learning episodes. So learning episodes could be connected to a learning project. They could also be ad hoc learning episodes where you encounter a problem at home. So you need to fix that. Okay, you need to know the name of the goal scorer at the World Cup. So you might just do it. So that's an ad hoc learning episode. So these are all examples of conceptual space. So you're moving between different tasks, different activities, different areas. So lifelong learners have to be able to cope with all these different options of learning as well in conceptual space. Another dimension is time. We're not just learning here and now. What we're learning now, we're based on prior knowledge, which will affect us in the future. We get to the future, the whole process is going on continually as well. So now we need to talk about how do we design mobile learning, specifically mobile lifelong learning. Currently, there are only broad guidelines for designing mobile learning. One area that I'm particularly interested in is actually not the overall framework, which of course we're working on as well, but the actual mobile learning activities, tools, whether it's technology, whether it's the pedagogy behind them as well. I think, I've made mistakes as well being an education technologist. We've gone from e-learning, we assume that e-learning can be used as mobile learning. It can't. There's a different way of thinking about it as well. So I think we really need to look in more detail about how we can design mobile learning. So this leads me on to the research question. Okay, so we're lacking in certain areas. My research question, again, bear with me, it's kind of long. What are the lifelong learning transitions of mobile learners? And, based on this, what are the implications for the design of technologies to support and facilitate these lifelong learning transitions? Technologies is there, design of technologies. Claudia pointed out earlier. Yes, technology are important as tools to help learners learn, but we're more focused on the actual learning itself and the learner. So yes, the technology are important, but we should also not lose sight that the learner is the center of everything. Objectives. I have 4 objectives here. The first one is to categorize the different types of mobile lifelong learning transitions. Previously, we had 5 sort of dimensions there. We need to clarify those dimensions as well in regard to the mobile learner. From that, we can hopefully develop a set of mobile lifelong learning metrics, which I'll go into more detail afterwards. And then to use these metrics to suggest possible design of technologies, learning technologies, learning activities to support and facilitate lifelong learning transitions. So they're the objectives of the project. First of all, again, after defining the dimensions of mobility, we need to look at what type of metrics we have to collect. So we got different type device, what type, whether it's a laptop, smartphone, whatever. Application, Microsoft Office, Internet Explorer. The task or the activity, is it being done at work, connected with the conceptual space? What type of activity is being done? The activity would be more like, are they using a spreadsheet? Are they browsing the internet? The topic would be work-related, home-related, personal-related, whatever. Duration, how long? Location, where is the mobile learning taking place? Social network, who are you learning with or doing the activity with? And self-regulation, which again I've pointed out earlier. How motivated, what is making the person learn or do the particular activity using mobile devices? We need to collect the data. So we're hoping to do maybe a quantitative survey using Ericsson employees, sample size maybe greater than 500. Ideally we have a second cohort as well. Maybe qualitative surveys as well, job shadowing, interviewing, whatever. It's important to emphasize that this is an iterative process, okay? It won't be done just once. We're going to have to fine-tune this process. And time allowed, hopefully we can do it a few more times. Problem areas, which there could be a lot, but I can just think of two at the moment. The first one is identifying when mobile technologies are being used for learning. It's going to be difficult, we don't know. In sort of formal learning environments where you have maybe learning management systems and whatever, you can sort of track learning. But when people are using it for maybe just ad hoc learning activities, informal learning, it may be difficult to identify. Maybe people just don't realize that they're learning as well, and they can't recall that when we're looking for that information. Another problem area maybe is making the correlations between self-regulated learners and the use of mobile technologies. Are more motivated learners using more mobile technologies, or is that just a coincidence? So that could be difficult to see the connection between the two. What we're going to produce is the output report on the following: how people use mobile technologies for lifelong learning transitions with the associated metrics, and then based on these findings, the implications and principles for the design of learning technologies to support and facilitate lifelong learning transitions. Of course, the data that we generate from the data collection we could feed into the dashboard as well. Some references there. And thank you for listening, and if you have any questions, I'll be delighted to hear.
Questions?
I'm not in your field, but I'm as a potential learner of using these mobile devices. So is there, when you are talking about the technological perspective of your research, is there any relation between this topic or this thematic area and the human-computer interactions, or what's so-called human-to-machine communication?
I think there might be issues, the usability of certain devices as well. If people are mobile, what can you use when you're on the bus? Okay, it's going to be a smartphone, maybe an iPad. So a lot of that is, the learning that you do on the move is going to be short. Maybe there's some annotation work you're going to do, maybe some referencing work, which we'll do then maybe on a desktop later.
And this usability plays a role, because we have hundreds of apps right now, but we are not using all of them. So
again, this is part of, by using the metrics, hopefully we can see what people need, and then we can inform people designing applications and the technology, like ways to go in design of learning materials and learning activities.
very interesting.
Did I understand well that the basics of your research and Claudia's research is the same, but you're going to do different type of studies? So that this is the situation.
One is more a human-oriented kind of type of study, and the other one is more. And so one would be more looking at the what are people doing and observing people, and the other one would be more collecting data of usage and trying to structure
So
the
you are
data.
the collecting data of usage.
Well, I think that's maybe the direction we're going, but we haven't, we've just started, we've only been at it a month now, so I think we need to, again, Claudia pointed out the literature review is very important at the moment, so that's what we're focusing on.
So really, the three of them, Claudia, Sean and Solid, are working on trying to get their head around the concept. Right? So I suppose that the assumption here is that people are moving around, okay? They're using technology, they're using it for learning, formally, informally, not formally. They're using it for when they need something for work, but also when they need something really mundane. Things are happening, we don't know what is happening, right? And we're trying to work out some of what is happening, okay? With the idea of them being able to say, well, if we wanted to do this would be a potential way of going about it.
It's really broad.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, and it can't be researched as it is right now, right? So it needs to be scoped down.
The word literature review has been mentioned quite often. Isn't the problem of this type of research that there is no literature because it's so new?
Yeah.
So it's kind of, setting the pace as you go along. You're probably one of the first to be doing this.
There's a lot of literature review on how it's been used in formal education situations.
Yeah, that's
But-
fashion.
Yeah.
Yes.
But what we're looking at now is there's very, very little out there. There are a couple of papers I've read on the sort of stuff we're trying to do here.
Yeah.
But as you say, there really isn't that much information on it.
Even simple things like, Charlie mentioned surveys.
Yeah.
That in essence, in my opinion, is rather old-fashioned as well. Because with mobile technology, you could be sending people push messages after they've searched on the internet, why did you search this? That's a kind of one way of looking. It's an expensive way, but it's one way of looking and collecting data.
One concern I have is collecting data. Well, people might know that they're actually learning when they're mobile. If you're relying on their recall to do that, it's impossible. So I think if you're embracing sort of new pedagogies about, constructivism, building their own learning materials and whatever, that could be a better way of tracking people's learning.
Also, I would say that is quite intrusive, and I don't know how much people will value to every time they do certain activity having to report they have done it. So it's very, very delicate, I think, to do this.
Yeah, this again could be down to sort of interventions and taking it on to one area. That's why I mentioned the self-reflective or self-directed learning, whatever, is that they, if people are self-regulated, self-directed, they will learn by themselves. You don't really have to worry. If we can identify patterns to recognise those people, it's the other people, again coming from an educational background here, who probably need all the support, need the interventions, which you get the HR departments, the training departments or whatever can look at the data and then put those interventions in place. So it is intrusive, but if the interventions are there and people know, so it's more formalised learning rather than informal learning.
More questions?
Well, I've been listening to both presentations, and maybe, for sure, I'm biased from my background, but listening to your presentation rang so many bells in the back of my mind concerning its true dimensions that have been explored not in this new context, but in the traditional one, and those are, yes, proactivity, metacognitive skills, I believe they're really important, and adaptability. So there is a whole bunch of literature out there about this, and I believe you could.
Yeah, that is, I've been reading some of that recently now. There is a lot of literature out there in regard to people trying to make mobile learning frameworks and all of that. So there is literature when saying there's no literature maybe in this specific area of the mobility. So that's the sort of literature. I think the first stage is to come up with that framework for mobile learning. Once we have that, then we can start moving into the mobility dimensions of it, which would be
So one feeling I got that learning usually has a goal, so it's goal orientation. We are also dealing with that. But this might be maybe something interesting especially in informal settings.
One of the metrics there, the self-regulated, why are you actually doing this particular activity? Maybe we give us some more information on that, which would be interesting.
My other thought was like, when do you start with lifelong learning nowadays? Because formal education is breaking up. So age 14, I think there are already lifelong learners on the sort of research market. And probably this kind of people need a different approach than lifelong learners who are in their 30s, 40s.
Yes.
So it's going to be also an interesting challenge how to scope, how to target this type of studies.
Just a short one. Well, I was wondering,
And
because you were mentioning self-regulation quite a lot, do you already have idea how would you measure it and how was it measured in that context?
No.
Okay.
But saying that, I do have some ideas, but I really don't know yet whether.
Because we were also reading, well, again from a different perspective about self-regulation, or for example in the case of, again, e-learning or learning in serious games, and it's often mentioned together with the goal orientation, and well, as with the other metacognitive strategies, the way to measure it is quite bothersome for the participants because it's measured either through diary studies or filming or observing all the, and I was wondering, because I really don't know, with all your technological skills, is there a way to kind of sort of track some indicators of regulation strategies without explicitly asking people or filming all the other, I mean, I have no idea. It just seems that it would be very convenient to find some sort of indicative.
The only thing I was thinking of now, and again this is based on going back to my education, my teaching background, is the technologies are there now. Mobile technologies are great now for having people produce materials or whatever. So maybe we have to formalize learning a little bit. Okay, it's not formal, but have create learning paths for people, which forces them to produce materials which can then be tracked as evidence of their self-regulation, maybe.
Okay.
Yeah. In web surveys, we do a lot of analysis of the session data. So we analyze all the timestamps. And by doing so, we know exactly which survey question find people boring or where they drop out, or so there's a whole bunch of, all the session data can be analyzed easily, no bothersome questions to any person or whatsoever. But it gives you really great insight.
Yeah, but I also have issues again coming from managing learning management systems. We know that we have all this information, but we don't know if the students are actually doing any learning when they're logging in, doing surveys or whatever. So it's evidence that they're actually doing something, but are they learning or not? I don't know. And it's the same with using mobile technology, I think. We've got evidence that they are using it, but what are they using it for, and are they using it for learning specifically? I think we need to come up with better strategies to reflect
But why
that.
don't you, if you don't know in such a learning session, if you want to know whether they have learned something or not, why don't you squeeze in an extra page with a question about what you have learned or whatever?
But
So that you can think in such a creative way of collecting data.
the problem is that type of learning we can sort of track anyway. But a lot of this is informal ad hoc learning that we're trying to track, and maybe we don't have opportunities to be able to put those questions into tests. So again, that's how we've talked about this now.
So everything, as you can see, everything is very undefined in the sense that I think there's two basic approaches. You either define exactly what you want people to learn, and it's a lot easier to track it, and it's a lot easier to kind of have measurement as this was learned or this wasn't learned, or to ask a question, or you try and capture these incidental, informal type of learning that is happening, okay, which is very difficult, okay, and probably impossible. We don't know yet, right? And now going back to your other question in relation to being able to track. So it's obvious that we gather a lot of data about usage right now, right? And that is available to us because a lot of people, without even knowing, are volunteering data, right? But in terms of what we've done, and probably in Trinity, out of all the consortium, we have the most difficult ethic application process. We're not allowed to capture and to use that data, right? So yes, the data is being collected, but the fact that the data is being collected doesn't mean that we can use it for research purposes, right? So if we're going to be collecting the data for research purposes, we have to go to our ethics committee beforehand and say to them, we're going to be capturing this data for this specific purpose, right? Or else we can capture it, but we can't use it. So there, and I think for all of us, there's huge ethical implications in terms of, it's not a problem of gathering the data. That is happening, and the technology can do it. Is can you use the data that you've gathered?
Is this a Trinity College policy, or do you think it's a general? Because I don't
Well,
think that Facebook does have
So
to do
Trinity is
that.
very strict about this, but the general expectation that more universities will have a closer look at their ethical and legal policies on data
Yeah, and
management.
just thinking about in practice, if company do, I mean, what company do? If LinkedIn is analyzing their data of the session, I don't know, as a user I've never been asked.
But I think
So,
they're in a very good
Alex, when you said
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
that is not in the international body, yeah, international body,
Whether before you download an app, whether if you've got an Apple, you're not even asked whether you
Yes.
give permission. If you've got an Android, they ask you, but the list is so long that
Of
everybody
course,
accepts.
we skip it, yeah.
But legally, we've all accepted. We've accepted via the iTunes store
Yeah.
because we initially accepted it, and via Android because we accepted it.
So this is the solution you could
No,
apply.
but I think there is a difference
Love
between,
you.
there's different things here, okay? So one thing is that you sign up for Facebook, okay, whatever, and you know that you've volunteered your data, right? So it's there, and they can use it. But the fact that they can use it doesn't mean that we, as researchers, can use it.
Unless you
Because
have
right.
There's a difference
Yeah,
between
unless you create your own app in which people, when they download it, they opt into giving you the data, okay? But in our procedure, okay, and there will be a session in terms of research ethics, in our procedure in Trinity, if you're going to be a participant in our research project, we must give you an information sheet, okay, in which it explains exactly what are we going to do, what kind of data are we going to gather, and how are we going to use that data. How are we going to keep that data, who is going to have access to that data, and so forth. So when you're participating, we need to inform you exactly what we're going to be doing.
Which is the same that LinkedIn is doing and everyone
Yeah, but
skips
the
and just
difference
saying,
is that
"Yes,
Facebook doesn't tell you, it's very difficult, right? And basically people just opt in, yeah? And but we have to spell it out for people and make it clear for people.
because the difference is the legal side of it and the ethical side of it.
That's right.
And
Yeah.
the legal side is the LinkedIn and Facebook, but the ethical side is our committee, which tells you have to explicitly inform people that they agree with this particular research, etc., etc. So
Yeah.
it's a
This is
And it's
not an
different.
ethical issue, that since we are sitting in the middle of a European project, we have to take into consideration the European Data Protection Law
the protection as well.
Yeah.
from 95.
Yeah, and one of the documents that each one of you has to submit, which everyone is missing still, okay, it's an ethics compliance or whatever it's called, right? And the reason why none of you have done it yet is because no ethics committee
No.
will give you
There's
approval
no need for it.
without knowing exactly what you're going to do.
I don't give you a certificate that I will not kill anybody in the next 24 hours.
Yeah.
The same. There's,
Yeah. Yeah.
This is the law.
So this is a matter that is really important for all of us, and in particular, since we're talking about gathering data or using data that is already available, right? Legally is already available, ethically